Your parents bought a house on one income. You cannot buy that same house on two. That is not a vibe, that is arithmetic. And once you see the ratio behind it, you cannot unsee it. This is the entire generational housing argument compressed into one number. But almost nobody explains the number itself. They just complain around it and leave you with a feeling instead of a fact. And I get it, every generation thinks they had it worse. Boomers dealt with mortgage rates north of 18% in the early 1980s. Paying that kind of interest on a 30-year loan is genuinely brutal. I am not pretending otherwise. Plenty of people back then bought at the top of a rate cycle and stretched every month to make it work. I am not saying it was free money handed to anyone who showed up. But the relationship between what a house costs and what a person earns has moved so far in 40 years that comparing those two experiences directly stops being an honest comparison. So here's the actual mechanism, because houses are expensive now is a complaint, not an argument. The number that matters is the house price to income ratio. That means how many years of gross income it takes to buy the median home where you live. In the early 1980s, that ratio sat around 3-to-1 across most of the country. 3 years of one salary, roughly, bought the median house. By 2023, that ratio had pushed past 7-to-1 in a lot of metro areas. And in places like Los Angeles or Austin or Boston, you are looking at 10-to-1 or higher once you run the numbers for that specific market. That is not inflation behaving the way inflation is supposed to behave, where prices and wages drift up together. That is wages sitting mostly still while the asset floats off on its own trajectory. And once an asset decouples from the income meant to purchase it, closing that gap later takes a wage explosion that never comes, or a price collapse nobody wants, or just decades of people getting priced out 1 year at a time. So far, it has been the third one. Every single year, compounding. Median household income, adjusted for inflation, has grown somewhere around 15 to 20% over the last 4 decades. Put that next to housing. Median home prices, adjusted the same way over the same window, have more than doubled. One side of the equation is crawling, the other side is sprinting. And the gap between them is the entire crisis in one sentence. Take a house that cost $95,000 in 1985 against the median household income that year of roughly $27,000. That's a ratio near 3.5-to-1. Adjust that house for inflation alone, and it should cost around $270,000 today. It does not. In most metro areas, that same house is $450,000 to $600,000, sometimes more. Because housing appreciation ran 2 to 3 times ahead of the inflation basket it was supposed to track, while the paycheck buying it only kept pace with that basket, if it kept pace at all. Here's the walkthrough that actually shows what changed, side by side. In 1985, one earner making that $27,000 median income needed roughly 3.5 years of full salary to equal the house price. And the mortgage, brutal 18% rate and all, was serviced by one paycheck, with a second income as pure upside. Today, take a couple each earning close to the current median individual income, combining to a household income around $75,000, against a $450,000 house that is a 6-to-1 ratio. So 2 incomes are landing somewhere worse than the 3.5-to-1 ratio one income used to produce. You need both salaries just to arrive at a number that is still less favorable than what one salary delivered 40 years ago. That is the entire generational insult in one comparison. 2 people, 2 jobs, 2 W-2s, landing in a worse spot than one person did alone. And the down payment target moves the same direction. 20% down on that $95,000 house in 1985 was about $19,000. 20% down on a $450,000 house today is $90,000. And you are saving toward that $90,000 out of a paycheck where rent already eats 30% or more before savings even start. compared to closer to 25% back then. So you are saving slower out of a smaller leftover share toward a target growing faster than your savings rate ever could. Every year you don't buy, the gap widens instead of closing, because the house is appreciating faster than your bank account is filling. Live inside that math for a few years and it stops being a spreadsheet problem. It starts reshaping actual decisions. It's the couple who both work full-time, combine every dollar, split every bill, and still get outbid by a cash offer. It's watching your rent increase 8% at renewal while your raise that year was 3%. So the gap that was supposed to close gets wider instead. It's doing everything your parents did. One job, then two, saving what you can, cutting what you can, and still ending up further from the finish line than they were standing still. And here's the part nobody says out loud, because it complicates the story everyone wants to tell. This is not really about avocado toast or lattes or Gen Z spending recklessly. It never was. It is about who owns the housing stock that used to turn over to first-time buyers. A rising share of single-family homes in growth markets is now bought by institutional landlords and investors paying cash, sometimes 20 to 25% of starter home sales in certain metros. And cash offers do not care about your pre-approval letter or your two incomes. You are not just competing against other families anymore. You are competing against pooled capital that has no mortgage rate to worry about and no ratio to solve for, because it never needed to borrow against an income in the first place. That is a different competition than the one your parents entered. And pretending it is the same market with the same rules is where the whole boomer comparison falls apart. Layer the other two mechanisms on top and you see why the math never lets up. Average student loan debt for a bachelor's degree holder now sits above $30,000. And that debt gets serviced for a decade or more before it is paid off. That's a decade where the down payment fund and the loan payment are fighting over the same paycheck. Add childcare, where full-time infant care in a lot of major metros runs $1,500 to $2,000 a month. That's more than a second mortgage in plenty of places. So that couple earning $75,000 combined is not actually saving $75,000 worth of anything. They are saving what is left after debt service, after childcare, after rent. And what is left is thinner every year while the house price keeps compounding on a completely separate timeline. So think about it from the inside of that couple's actual month. They make the combined $75,000, they pay $1,100 in student loan minimums between them, they pay $1,600 for one kid in daycare because both of them have to work to hit that number in the first place, and rent takes another $1,900. That is before groceries, before gas, before a single dollar goes toward the $90,000 they need for a down payment. What used to be a savings problem is now a triage problem, deciding which future gets funded this month and which one waits. And the house always waits, because it is the only line item you can defer without an immediate penalty. Except, deferring it is exactly what makes it more expensive next year. This is why it feels less like bad luck and more like a personal failure, even though the ratio proves it isn't one. You did the things you were told to do. You got the degree, which is why you have the $30,000. You got the job, which is why you have the income that still isn't enough. You split every bill with a partner, which is the two-income strategy your parents never had to use. And you still watch the number move away from you every year. That makes you feel behind in a race where the finish line is sprinting faster than you are, no matter how fast you run. What actually needs to change is supply, not vibes, because the ratio is a supply and ownership problem before it is anything else. Zoning reform that allows more than single-family lots in the metros where jobs actually are. Faster permitting so building keeps pace with population growth instead of trailing it by years. And real limits on how much single-family housing stock institutional buyers can absorb in a given market. Those three things move the ratio. Wishing wages up faster does not. Because wages have had 40 years to close this gap and they have not. And there's no reason to believe the 41st year is different without changing the supply side directly. What I actually did with this information was stop treating the ratio like a personal scoreboard. I started treating it like weather, something to plan around instead of something to feel judged by. I rent in a lower cost of living market on purpose. I put a fixed percentage into index funds every month regardless of what rent does that year, because compounding in the market is the one lever moving in my favor while the housing ratio moves against me. That is not a workaround for everyone, and some of you are in metros where even that math is tighter than mine. But treating the down payment target as a moving number instead of a fixed one changed how I saved for it. Because chasing a fixed target that inflates faster than your savings rate is a losing game by design. And no amount of discipline fixes a target that outruns you structurally. The ratio went from 3-to-1 to 7-to-1 in 40 years, and it did that while you were being told to just work harder and save more. Working harder doesn't fix a ratio. Saving more doesn't fix a ratio. The only thing that fixes a ratio is more supply meeting the same demand, or wages actually catching up. And neither one of those is currently in motion in most of this country. So you are not behind because you did something wrong. You are behind because the number moved, and nobody sat you down and showed you the number until right now.